All right, a Friday night.
Yes, a Friday night. We're back at it.
We're doing it, and we're doing something different that we haven't done since we've started this evidence-based triathlete podcast. And we talked about doing this, and now we're finally getting an opportunity to do it. And that is to do something remote. Obviously, I'm not remote. I'm working the controls back here in the production studio. And we've got some guests, some special honored guests here for our Friday night evidence-based triathlon, and we're going to do some hands-on testing. So this is going to be a lot of fun. So Ted, why don't you go ahead and do the introductions and get things rolling?
Yeah, so we're super excited. We're here tonight at Elevate Sports Performance, and we have the owner, Brian Chandler, with us.
Hello.
And one of the coaches here, Max Jones, who is a regular contributor to our podcast. And we're just really excited to be here, and once again trying to go remote. So hopefully there won't be too many technical difficulties tonight. And like you said, we're going to do some testing. We're going to do some functional movement screenings, specifically for endurance athletes. I'm going to be screened tonight, so we'll see. I'm sure I'm going to fail 7 ways to Tuesday, but we're going to have some fun here tonight and see if we can't, educate as we go.
All right, this is awesome. And yeah, these two have been big part of the community, the triathlon community, doing all sorts of races and coaching and helping a lot of people. So this is going to be a lot of fun. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mute my camera so only you folks are showing, but I'll still be on audio. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you three. So thanks again. This is great.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. So here we are. We're going to start it out, and we're going to leave it to Brian to get us going here tonight. So he is going to once again run me through some testing. We'll see what happens. So take it away.
Thank you. So first, I kind of want to talk about just the importance of understanding what you need as an athlete in general to improve your overall performance. What we do here at Elevate is very, very individualized, and we assess every person's individually to make sure that we have all the information we need in order to help you. So what he might need versus what I might need, what Max needs, is all going to be a little bit different. So we can't really generalize what every person might need in the gym or mobility or flexibility or things like that. We kind of have to take a look and see what's under the hood. So we're going to do that first.
Yeah, we're going to do it. Let's have some fun here. I've literally done no warm up whatsoever. I did ride my bike this morning, really easy. For like 90 minutes.
So, and ultimately, most humans come in the door and they operate in the non-warmed up state 99% of the time anyway. So if you think of like a week strata, 168 hours in a week, an athlete's going to work out between 6 and 12 hours a week. Ted's probably in the upper end range of that. But the more cold someone can be is probably going to be the system that they're going to operate in more often. So we actually like it, the fact that he's in a cold state, because it won't give us some false positive readings or things like that, where his mobility might be almost better than it might be more improved than really what it might actually be. So
and I'm not fatigued at all. I'm feeling good. I feel like I could go for a run right now or bike right now. So
you look great at the half.
I look great. Yeah, you couldn't have got me on Monday morning. I was feeling a little rough after that half marathon on Sunday night, but we're good.
Yeah, perfect. So okay, let's go ahead. You're gonna lay on your back right here.
Okay.
All right. So the first thing we look at with all of our athletes, definitely even our endurance runners, is going to be, we do what we call our table testing. So table testing is going to be a passive test where we're looking at how the different joints move. Okay, we have kind of these markers or metrics that we're looking for in terms of joint range of motion, how he's actually accomplishing that motion. So is it smooth? Are there a lot of like pinchiness, things that don't feel really great for him? And ultimately, it's going to let us know what kind of shapes and what kind of positions that his body is going to be able to get into when he's performing any type of movement, whether it's a squat in the gym or if he's on his bike. These numbers are going to allow us to kind of see what strategy is he going to use to try to accomplish that task. Okay, everybody can go from A to B. What we try to look at is how that person goes from point A to point B. So I'm really trying to look at the how here. So first one, Max, read us off here.
Yeah, first one we're looking at is our sternal angle.
Yeah, so the first thing we're going to look at is the ISA, which that stands for infrasternal angle. That is the angle of your rib cage, lower rib cage right here. There's a lot of different angles. The reason why we're checking this angle is to kind of see more on a genetic standpoint what his structure already kind of looks like from the start. Okay, this will kind of lead us into some of the movements that he might be really good at or movements he might not be so good at. So it's going to be checking the angle of that rib cage. Max, you were right. We have a narrow rib cage. So what I'm looking at in that rib cage is his rib cage is going to be is less than 90 degrees. It's pretty narrow, which is really, really common in the endurance. Most medium, high level endurance athletes are going to have a pretty narrow rib cage.
So John, a little close up, we're just looking at just under that rib line. He's going to have Ted actually going to use two thumbs right here. He's going to have Ted do a couple breaths, and then we're looking at the angle where the thumbs come together. And if it's less than 90 degrees, he's going to be an infrastructural angle, or excuse me, a narrow. And then if he's going to be more than 90, 120. Or
Yeah,
90.
now we're just doing pretty much anywhere over 90.
And this is kind of how people come in the door, John. So it's kind of has nothing to do with how much he's training, or really anything about him. It's just kind of it's either he's a narrow or he's wide, and that kind of draws out our decision tree down the road.
Yes. Yep.
I love it, because
so,
I never would have thought that you would look at that as you're going along. So this is great to start there. It's totally new to me.
yeah, it is one of the most important things we check on the front end, just to kind of, it really sets the tone with now I already kind of know what movements he's probably going to be better at than others, which again, that's what we're about to find out. So Max, what's next?
Chan, we're looking at hip flexion.
Perfect. Hip flexion. I think pretty sure all endurance athletes need hip flexion, runners, definitely on the bike. So hip flexion for us, we're going to bring the leg up. And what I'm looking for is as I'm bringing his knee straight in towards his sternum or the middle of his chest, I'm trying to see how much passive hip flexion he has until his body's telling me to stop. Okay, so I'm just feeling he's probably going to be right around in there. Now, Ted, do you feel a pinch or a pressure or anything in front of your hip, or does it feel pretty comfortable?
I mean, there's a little pressure, but it's not really hurt.
Okay. So what we're looking for is 140 degrees, which again, depending on which book you read, there's ranges for joint range of motion. It just depends on which textbook you're looking at. But we're looking for roughly 140 degrees hip flexion, or to make it simple, your thigh should be able to pretty much get up to that rib cage. That's a very easy way to look at it without getting too specifics. So as we get in there, I'm probably going to stop him around here. That's where his body's telling me to go, and we're pretty darn close. It's got a pretty good range of hip flexion, and it's comfortable. So that's really all I need to know. What a lot of people will feel is they'll feel a lot of pinchiness, tightness, or they might feel their back pulling, or the most common thing people feel, they feel a lot of pressure and uncomfortable pinchiness in the front of the hip. That's really important to know, because if you don't have a lot of available joint range of hip flexion, you're gonna achieve that position in another way, which is where we start diving into some compensations and ways that he might move. So we're gonna pass Ted on this one right here, just to make sure that
First one down.
Yep. Now I'm gonna quickly check the other side. His left leg starts to turn out a little bit. So again, I'm looking for little things that he might be doing to kind of cheat the motion. A lot of people tend to turn their hips out of the way, or they might move their low back out of the way to kind of get more range. So the first sign of anything moving, I'm going to pretty much stop and say, that's his end point. That's very comfortable. I can go past it if I want, but he's going to have to cheat a little bit to get there. So this one's going to be a little bit less. Any pinchiness, tightness, or anything on this side? Just a little bit of pinchiness. Very light. Okay. So I'd say it's pretty close. I'd give him just a little bit less. So usually what we write on our forms here is we'll estimate if we don't have somebody to help us with measuring, but we'll just either kind of pass or fail. Is he achieving the full range? Yes or no? And that kind of tells that's a good starting point. So we'll go a little bit less than full, so we can write 120, 130. Yeah, just a touch. Perfect. All right. Next. Now we're going to look at rotations. Yep, internal. Perfect. So hip rotation, we're going to bring the leg up 90 degrees, and all I'm looking for is how much rotation. We're checking external rotation of the hip first. Again, our standard range that we look for is 60 degrees of rotation. Again, I'm just estimating here. He's going to be less than 60 degrees for sure. Okay. means you're still a good person, Ted, promise. But yeah, little tightness in this left hip, probably 45. Yeah, just a little. Then we're gonna go the other way, internal rotation, which is one leg.
Interesting. I've always done that stretch from internal rotation like that. I haven't done the external part, so I haven't checked my external rotation like that. That's great. But I bet you a lot of your endurance athletes struggle with that rotation part.
Yes, and I would say the internal rotation, which is what we're checking right now, is by far, we look for about 40 degrees of internal rotation. So Ed probably has maybe 15, 20 if I'm being really nice. It's Friday, so 20. But that's a motion that is very, very, very important. Ultimately, if you don't have these rotations, you have to create them somewhere else. So whether you're in the gym doing squats or lunges or anything like that, you need those rotations of the femurs, of the pelvis, making sure that they can move together and in the right ways. Otherwise, he's going to have to find another strategy to get to that point. So that could mean, man, after my workout or after my run, I feel really tight in this specific area. And what we're looking for is there anything in his body that could be making him overuse certain parts of his body to create that pressure or that irritation or that tendonitis, the overuse stuff. That's exactly what we're looking for.
I love it. And I realized I just failed my first question on my functional anatomy test in terms of I called external rotation, internal rotation. So thank you for keeping those correct and me being off on that. So that's awesome.
All right, so now let's check the right leg. We're gonna go external first. Okay. Probably at, I'd say right around 45, 50, give 50s. Now, normally what we do, obviously, we do a pretty big history, right? We'll sit down and ask Ted about his injuries, ask him about anything that he complains about. So let's do that really quick. Ted, is there anything that we need to know about?
My history list is long.
Have you ever been to Ted?
Sorry, I have actually a left hip gluteus medius tendinopathy confirmed by MRI.
Okay. Got that, Coach Max? Yep. All right, left hip. Gluteus medius. Enough, got it. All right, let's check the internal rotation. And again, I stop right when I feel some resistance because, again, I'm looking at this passively first before we have them stand and do some other things. But 20, 25, 20, you know, just estimating for this, but definitely not 40. That's the most important thing. All right, what we got next?
We got straight leg raise.
Straight leg raise, one of my favorite tests. So straight leg raise, now we're just seeing how much length does he have on the backside of his body by keeping his leg straight and just bringing it up. Again, normal range that we kind of look for is roughly 80 to 90 degrees. Again, roughly right around 90 degrees, but the range is around 80 to 90. So we're just short of that. This is where I feel a first kind of resistance. Okay, now where do you feel the stretch here? If you feel that stretch. Okay, center hamstring. Pretty normal answer. You get a lot of different answers from back to knee to groin. You might feel, people feel a lot of different things. So nice, got that. Yep.
So he's a no at 80 degrees?
He's a no. Yep, and probably just beneath that. Yeah. Nice and slow.
And I love that you test with the knee in different angles. And for a lot of folks who are watching, they may not know, or they probably know it, but maybe they don't fully grasp the importance of muscles that cross two joints. And when you have the knee extended, like you're doing now versus flex, that's going to influence what type of range of motion you're doing. So this is great to see.
Yeah. We want to challenge the pelvis, the hip, the femurs in ways that you're gonna end up being in those positions when you're in a crouch position on a bike, which is much more hip flexion dominant, versus an extension position. Going from the bike to the run is always a very, very complicated task for people because you're going from one extreme to the other. You're going from the flexion bias to the extension bias. And a lot of people have a really big issue going from one, especially when you're in it for hours, and going right into the running piece. So, all right, we got just right there, Ted. Okay, same sensation, or is this a little different? More polar. A little bit more proximal. Yep.
Maybe you can say like the glute.
Yeah, okay, so definitely higher up on the pelvis.
Well, because it's more like lateral.
Okay, yeah. And so it gets two different sensations, one being a little bit more lower on the hamstring on the right leg, and then this left side just much higher up in the hip, kind of right under that glute.
Interesting.
Got those?
Shoulders. Talking shoulders.
Shoulders, yes, important.
So let's pause there real quick.
Yeah.
So one thing, John, to take away from is like we are doing table tests. These are known as passive range of motion tests. Obviously, in athletic movement, we're looking at dynamic or active range of motion. We start with the passive range of motion because it helps us kind of draw a picture first of what the athlete's capabilities are in this environment, because the brain is going to allow a certain amount of passive range of motion to happen, and then it's going to kind of have almost like bumper plates if you're bowling, right, on how much active range of motion you have. So we kind of start here to then kind of delve into what kind of usable range of motion the athlete's going to have in the athletic context, in the swim, the bike, and the run. So if they're severely limited here, again, someone is still going to go to the pool, someone's still going to get on their bike, someone's still going to go for a run. How they're accomplishing movement strategies in an active sense, we really get a lot of good info in a very easy to reach way by doing these table tests. So, and versus having someone go through a training program and finding out, hey, they weren't doing things the right way, and now they're in an injury cycle. So that's kind of why we start with this on the front end. And these are easy to achieve tests if you have someone that knows what they're looking for. So
Yeah, if you can't do it passive, the way you will do it actively is probably not going to be ideal in a given scenario, especially under repetitive loads and stress and volume. So, okay, now we're going to look at the shoulder. So, okay, first we're just going to check external rotation.
John, if you want me to move the camera a little bit, I could get in there a little bit if you want me to. What do you think?
Yeah, whatever. If you're not connected on the camera, if you want to rotate around, but this is still pretty good. We can see the movement, and obviously this is great for triathletes because of the swimming and runners as well.
So let's say roughly 60-ish range.
So what the range is now, we're looking at external rotation of the shoulder, internal rotation of the shoulder. Again, we worked with a lot of swimmers. This is kind of really applicable to the swimming community. Is we're looking at the total range of the shoulder. So ideally what I'm looking for is roughly 90 degrees of passive range. Again, there's going to be a lot of athletes that can go way past 90 degrees, especially anybody with like throwing histories, that layback position of the arm. They'll have 120, 130, maybe you see some crazy numbers get up there. But standard, we're looking for at least to accomplish 90. And then on the internal rotation, same thing. I like to see him be able to almost touch the table comfortably, okay, and not have to use his entire arm and shoulder girdle to get down there. Okay, so I just kind of hold the shoulder still. I'm just wanting this to fall down and just kind of see where that stopping point is. And we're roughly, roughly 60.
So is a yes on external, no on internal?
Yes. Yep. All right, check this side.
And while Chan's measuring this, John, again, how an athlete goes about getting the 180 degrees, we're not as concerned about, but we find that there are certain sports trends that lend itself to more external bias versus a swimmer being more internal bias. So again, question one, do they have the 180 between the two? The answer is no. Where are they limiting from? And then is the limiting factor associated with the sport needed, right? So there's a certain amount of internal rotation shoulder that's needed for swimming, and we don't have it. That's a good movement strategy to start working for, or otherwise you throw on 10 to 12,000 yards for this athlete a week. They're the shoulder problem in 6-8 weeks, you know?
I love it. Yeah. And this clearly relates to swimming as you talk about, but I know we can probably talk more about stories later. I am interested in this type of measurement for runners. And if there, is something that runners ignore in terms of their upper body mobility.
Yep. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of issues in terms of gait, running mechanics. If the torso, which when I think about the shoulder, it's really the torso, the rib cage. If they can't rotate and move, there's going to be a lot of issues with being able to run efficiently and have that kind of effortless power as you're moving. So
I love it.
All right, we'll check this side.
And I'll just, while you're doing that, I'll just add, from a research perspective, we are very guilty, and I am implicating myself here, when we do running assessments of kinematics, we often just look from the hip down and we put a dot for the upper body. And so we sometimes ignore the upper body movement and really focus on lower extremity in the research world. So this is great to see a whole body assessment.
Yeah. Okay. So on this side, in this arm, he definitely has a little bit less external rotation. I just kind of let gravity take it, but he definitely has more internal rotation on his left arm. Okay, so both of his shoulders, his left side moves a little bit differently than his right side. Right side, he's got a little bit more external rotation qualities versus internal, and then this side is going to be the opposite. Okay? And a lot of that stuff too comes from the asymmetries that are naturally kind of included in the sports that we do. So from swimmers, if you're breathing predominantly on one side, you're gonna rotate more in different ways to accommodate that consistently. And then you add in all the reps and the load, you're gonna start seeing these changes. We work with a lot of rotational athletes, golfers, baseball players, even just runners, rotational athlete. And you start seeing these things kind of come one leg or one arm being the polar opposite of the other, whether it's a hip rotation or a shoulder rotation. And again, these things can be normal in a certain capacity, but it can also go too far down one avenue to where you start seeing problems start to come up. So,
and the thing that really, roasts the noodle at the end of the day is, do you change it? Do you try to affect change? Is what Ted's strategy the most efficient for Ted at this point of his life and point of his career? We're going to get all these measurements and whatnot. Do we, when we get all these, we have to kind of make some decisions on what we're going to focus our time on changing versus what we're going to focus on, almost kind of celebrating, right? Those are his individual differences that make him who he is. And that's where he creates power from. So you almost don't want to take away all the tools that he's built up to this point with his training. You almost want to kind of make sure, can he stay on the road, the right road and not hit the sides? And that's kind of where the critical application of a lot of these table tests go. There's no good or bad. There's what is, and then what you do about it. Right?
Love it. That's a really important point, and that's why you have people who are focused and their expertise is in this. So this is great.
Yeah. And we laugh about the Usain Bolt. He's had his body tested by a lot of people, and he has some significant asymmetries in his body, and I wouldn't necessarily be messing with them if it's something that he's adapted to make him do what he's able to do. So. The real question is, once you get this information, it's making the decision on, do we think that this is an issue, or is it causing you any problems? Or is this something that, given the sport and the demands of the sport in general, is this normal? Is this something that we expect?
That's great.
We're testing shoulder flexion.
Yeah. This one's not on there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just so horizontal abduction. What I look for is your ability to bring your arm across your body. You should be able to bring your elbow roughly to the center of your nose. That's kind of what I look for without measuring. So close, just a touch. We'll check shoulder flexion. I kind of just make sure his ribs stay in one place. Again, just looking at, can he keep his humerus in line before he wants to rotate or cheat or do anything like that. And should have about 160 degrees, or an easy way to remember that is just getting your bicep close to your ear. That's roughly about what the norm would be. Again, what is normal? That's a whole nother topic, but it's just a range that we look for. Any pinching is tight. So, and I'm just stopping the first sign of resistance. So the second I feel anything telling me to stop.
And you like doing this with a bent elbow, Chan, versus a straight arm?
Yes. If he straightens his arm, there's a lot of ways that we've seen that people are able to cheat this test. So when I actually have his arm bent, I can really feel what the humerus is doing, which is really what I'm looking at. What the forearm does when it rotates. I need to make sure that the humerus is moving in a very, very clean fashion so we can see where the stopping point is. So definitely not full.
No.
So probably it was probably like 120-ish.
Okay. And we've adapted, John, these tests over time because we've gotten our reps on what's worked, what's provided us good feedback, and ultimately you got to run the application of the experiment. What do we get out of it? Like we used to test that test straight arms back to the wall, and then literally in the couple of months I've been on orders, that's a new update to the test.
Yeah.
that we've been, they're able to get better information out of it. So that was good for me to see.
That's great.
Yeah. The beautiful thing about our industry as a whole is we're learning so much so fast, from the high level athletes to even just the people we see every single day in the clinics, in the gym, how they move. So yeah, these tests have evolved over so quickly. It's cool. So left side is a little bit tighter.
Yep.
So a little bit tighter in horizontal adduction, a little bit tighter in overhead flexion. So don't worry about the adduction. No.
Yeah. It's just a no for those.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yep.
And then about a 110,
Yeah.
110 for short. Okay,
I'm up.
where are we at next?
Seated trunk rotation.
Okay, now so what we're gonna do is you're gonna take a seat and just face the iPad. Okay, now we're gonna look at his trunk, and his trunk as a whole is gonna be his rib cage. So not necessarily just the spine.
No, you look. You don't have to talk to this. This is the camera.
No, I know.
No, you're all good.
Have it. I hear voices. Okay, so we're looking at trunk rotation, which includes, think of it as his rib cage and his spine. It's not just the spine, it's this whole upper body rotation. There's a lot of stuff that has to be able to do this motion. So the way we test it is knees are going to be together, because all I'm trying to do is anchor his lower body down. And I don't want him to move through here. I just want to see it happen from up top. So he's going to cross his arms on his shoulders. Okay. Now, keeping this right where it is, you're going to sit nice and tall and rotate the upper body to the right. It's nice and slow until, yep. And what I'm,
while you
Go
do
ahead.
this, someone wrote in the messages, and I forgot to check that, the comments, why do most endurance athletes have that neural rib cage that we were talking about in the beginning? I know you touched on that a little bit.
yeah, that's really good. Now, don't get me wrong. There are wide rib cages that do endurance sports, 100%. Narrow rib cages tend to be better at those sports. And it comes down to like the way that they manage force a little bit better. They tend to be a little more slender in shape because their rib cage and their pelvis tends to be a little more narrow. Their ability to put force through the ground more efficiently, step over step, tends to be a little bit easier for them. Now, versus a wide rib cage, they're a little bit more of a cylinder shape. So you'll see every power lifter that can deadlift or lift a lot of weight, put a lot of force into the ground, they're shaped like this for a reason. And they just happen to be a little better, more predisposed to moving more force through the ground easier, because the wider the frame, the easier it is they can pressurize and put force straight downward. So it's more of that. I think narrow rib cages realize that they're better at these sports early on. The sport chooses the person kind of thing, like in terms of they just realize that they're a little bit better. But wide rib cages definitely do endurance sports. We have a lot of them. It's just,
John, last week we talked about aerodynamics. I mean, a little bit more aero,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Just
well, and think of it like a funnel. If you have a funnel, if you take a funnel, you pour water down, it speeds up as it goes like this. If you're like this, the ability to put force down it's harder. So the people that are a little bit more like this in the rib cage, they're not going to be as quick to put force into the ground. So if we're doing like plyometrics or we're doing certain exercises, you can see who my power athletes are versus the springy people that move like rabbits. They're just very, very fast on their feet and explosive. They are all super, super narrow rib cage.
Love it. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, let's uncross for a second. We'll do the test one more time. So I'm looking for is 50 degrees of upper body rotation. Again, 40, 50, 45, 50, depending on the book, but I kind of go 50. I'm looking at basically where his acromions are on his shoulders. Just drawing my line and just kind of see how much range he has. Now, Ted, do you have any feedback on, do you feel any tightness? Any
mid-thoracic.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, let's go to the other side. Good.
Perfect.
Good. So we'll look and we'll get a baseline measurement, how much he can turn. Now, does one side feel easier to you?
They both feel horrible.
Okay. They definitely be a little bit better, but I feel like this side was just a touch less than the right side. I feel like you had a little bit more space, but again,
and I think it's when I swim, I breathe that way, like almost 99% of the time, and so I'm more used to it, right?
Exactly. You are a representation of what you do repeatedly. That's why these sport adaptations are very, very important. If you're going to somebody to help you with your body, you have to take into consideration that, well, what do you do all the time? And it makes sense why he's shaped the way that he's shaped because of the sports that he does. So when you're either passing or failing or trying to accomplish a certain goal, make sure you're giving him a fair chance because this is what he's good at. So that's really important. Okay, we got our measures there.
Toe touch. Standing.
Oh, now we're gonna go standing. So we're gonna do a few tests that we do at the very end off the table. So he's gonna be moving his own body. So it's way more active and we can kind of see what shapes he can get into. So let's do this. I'm gonna move this. We'll stand right in front of the table. This. Okay. And first one you're gonna do is you'll face me. We're gonna do a toe touch.
Okay.
So the first
Good luck.
exercise, yes. So if you're gonna try this, and you're a male, most of us fail this test just out of the odds. This is the numbers game. So feet together, but don't go down super fast if you haven't done this in a while. Knees need to be straight. And it doesn't matter if you can't touch your toes. I just need to see how far you can bend forward. So keeping the knees straight, let's go ahead and round forward and see how far we can go. Yeah, a couple things I'm looking at is, the shape of his overall back and his spine. Is it rounded? Different curves happening. Does he shift his weight back? Does he keep his legs straight? And ultimately, does he get down to his toes? And I don't know if you can see it quite perfect, but he's just short.
Okay.
If I really push it, I could do it, but I'm not gonna.
Yep. How's that, John? Can you see it? Can we see the toe touch there? I think so. Oh, you got it?
I'm losing your audio just a little bit there.
Can you see the toe touch?
Yeah. Okay, we're able to see that.
Okay, perfect. So pretty good overall. He's able to get his body down there. And again, this is looking at how can he shift his hips backwards. Okay, can you shift your pelvis backwards and be able to accomplish that rounded position? A couple of things that automatically come to mind when I'm looking at somebody doing a toe touch is if they can't accomplish a toe touch, they're going to have a very unique strategy on how they hinge their body forward. So deadlifting, any hip dominant based strength movements are going to be something that I'm going to be very interested in seeing how they do it, because the reason why he's going to have a hard time touching his toes has to do with the amount of hip rotation that he has. That, without getting too down the deep end, when you're limited in that hip rotation at your femurs, he's not going to be able to push his pelvis backwards to accomplish that shape going all the way down.
Run out of room.
It's going to run out of room. Yep. Okay, the next one is going to be the squat. So feet are going to be together. Still together. Yep. Arms are going to be out in front. Keeping the heels down. You're going to go down as low as you can, keeping the heels on the ground. Good. And good. Come on up. Hey, nice job. Hey, good effort there.
I felt my chest touching there, so I felt like it was pretty.
Yes, pretty good. It's pretty good. So what happened was my goal to pass is going to be for you to break parallel. We want to be able to get
My thighs.
your hips to get lower than your knees. And how do you accomplish that? So for you get to a point where there's kind of that sticking point, and then you kind of lean forward a little bit to kind of get a little bit more, but ultimately you kind of stop going down from the lower body. So there is this point where the lower body stops going and the upper body keeps going, which is what you felt when it pushed against your stomach.
So while we're on that, how much of that is changeable, or is that more of how he is?
Well, I think given his shape and the way that he sits in that rounded bike position, I don't think he's really going to be a good squatter, like a vertical squatter. I mean, so there's ways to squat. There's a lot of squat variations that are important that will fit him really well. But ultimately, are you going to be the super vertical, straight down squatter? Probably not. You spend too much time forward. So your natural strategy is going to be to pitch forward. So, and that's not because of that's just because of the sport, just as much as anything. So that's all these things are so important when you're choosing strength exercises or what your expectations are in the gym. Exactly. Right? You don't want to come in and say, "Oh, my goal is to do this," and I'll be the first one to say, "I don't think that's going to happen." So
It's not going to happen well over the time of a training cycle.
yeah, or you might hurt yourself trying. That's a big issue. You might hurt yourself trying to get down there. So, okay. what do we have left? Oh, just cervical. So we'll face the iPad here. So now I'm checking some neck rotations. So you're just gonna rotate your head either way first, and just a comfortable neck turn. Again, range of motion wise, what I'm looking for is, can he get his chin to get right in the middle of that clavicle, at least close to it without rotating his body. Back to the side a little bit. Go one more time to the right. Okay, right. Fight just short of that. Okay, let's go to the other side. Good. I always ask, how does it feel? Do you feel any tension?
Definitely
pulling?
tighter going to the left,
Okay, tighter going to the left. Okay. Yeah, got it.
but no
Got it.
pain.
No pain. Good, good. Now, anything we've done so far, was there anything that bothered you, that was uncomfortable or anything like that?
No.
Good, good. So that's the last one, right? Good. Okay, so this is our like kind of starting point with every athlete that walks through our doors to kind of see just quickly head to toe, what do we need to look at to see what ranges of motion is he going to be really good at, which ones do we need to work on the most?
I love it. So maybe I didn't mean to interrupt, but maybe this is a question in the comments as well. And one I had is, where does age show up in your assessment, as well as male, female?
Yes, good question. So age, I'm a firm believer that if you continue to use your ranges of motion and you train appropriately, we have 80-year-olds in here that move very, very well. And I've gone up to them and asked them, what's the secret? And he said, just don't stop. So there is this component of, if you don't use it, you will lose it. There's this, the body will adapt to what you do. So if you are less active and you are sitting more often and you're just deciding not to get your body moving in these positions, your body's gonna not need to have them. And the body is so adaptable that it just gets really good at doing what you're asking it to do. So age is one of those kind of, a lot of people blame age, and I don't buy most people's excuse about, I just got older. So the age thing is you take it into account, because there is going to be less fluid in the body in general. So the joints will have a little bit more limitations as they age, but lifestyle is going to be the number one driving force for that.
I love it. That's great.
Your body's always striving for efficiency in any capacity, if it's in a negative context or in a positive context.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to age related, if you're always moving, you're always trying to improve the efficiency of the range of motions that you're working on, right? So if you're not working on them, your body's becoming more efficient at not doing those well. Like, again, sitting at a desk chair all day, for example, for your whole work career, and then getting out of it and expecting things to be just fine, versus getting efficient and being in a TT position for 5 hours. Again, you're getting efficient at the things you practice. What comes down to it is, is it in a positive context or is it in a negative context, meaning, a bad outcome happened from it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the biggest takeaway when it comes to that, in my opinion.
When I teach this in class, we talk about like components of fitness, right? You have your strength, you have your agility, you have your power. All of those things are going to decrease as you get older. Number one, because of less testosterone as we get older, less human growth hormone as we get older. But flexibility is the one that you can maintain if you continue to practice it. We look at 105-year-old yogis that can do unbelievable things. We don't see 105-year-old strength athletes that can still squat 500 pounds. It doesn't exist. But flexibility can be maintained.
Yeah. And then the male to female is versus female is very, very interesting, because they definitely have a different, I would say the changes that you can make in the female population in general is different. It can happen a lot faster. And I think it comes down to a hormonal piece to it, but their ability to make changes is incredibly fast compared to my guys that have guys tend to be stiffer, I guess is the easiest way to say it. It takes consistent effort all around, but the women tend to need to learn how to control all of that range of motion. We get way more females on the table that are like passing every test that you throw at them, and then when you watch them move, you're like, oh, I see why everything hurts. And it's because they need a little bit more stability, a little bit more control, coordination, things like that. and I'm just generalizing, of course, but, and then on the male side, we get way more males coming in that are pretty stiff and they need to learn how to gain access to these ranges of motion. So that would just be like a super general male versus female in terms of what we see range of motion wise, but we have way more females that they pass these tests with flying colors, and then they're also hurting in a lot of different ways. So this just gives us a quick insight to kind of see what shapes you can create, what the joints can do, but ultimately we have to see you move in action to kind of know what's going on.
I love it. Yeah, because the two extremes are probably bad. Too little range of motion and too much range of motion.
100%.
But I think it's very sport specific. And you mentioned the power lifter, right? Like they need stability more than mobility, right? Then you have an athlete that's more of, let's say, a basketball player where they need a lot of movement. They need more mobility than stability. And so I think these gentlemen are doing such a good job of explaining this is dependent on the athlete and the sport that they want to compete in. I mean, you work a lot with golfers. Mobility is very, very important, right? And then you'll have areas of the body that mobility is important and areas where stability is important. And that's even getting deeper into it. And understanding the athlete in front of you is so critical.
Yeah, you have to understand the demands of the sport. If you don't understand what the sport's asking out of your body, it's honestly, like, even for me, like we have somebody on our team that is really, really smart in hockey. He played it, he coaches it, he knows the game of hockey. I can barely skate 10 feet without falling. I know very little outside of watching Golden Knights hockey. So I don't truly understand what the energy demands are, what all of those capacities of hockey entail. So like, I need his help and get him involved with helping these kids, because I can only do so much with understanding the sport. That's really important.
I love it. This is good stuff. Now, did we have? I lost my script here. I'm producing this episode. Do we have more, or because I've got more questions, but I don't want to.
Yeah. So I guess I would like to go back really quickly to the power lifter and narrow versus wide, because I think there's always a lot of questions about that stuff. Is when you're looking at stiffness. Okay, we talk about stiffness a lot, and that has to do with creating compression in the body. Okay, when you create compression, you're able to create force. And the analogy that I like to use with people is, you take a soda can and you shake it up, you can stand on it. And you can try this at home, it works. You shake a soda can, you can stand on it. And the reason why that has that rigidity in the structure is because of pressure. So when you're looking at we would call them a compressive athlete, an athlete that their sport requires a very, very high level of creating force, which is the power lifter. When you create force and you compress around the joints, you're gonna lose ranges of motion, because that's what you need to be able to do your sport. You will not see a power lifter, a really, really good power lifter, come in and be like passing very, very few of these tests. And that's because they require that compression around the pelvis, around the rib cage, around the shoulders, so that when they're trying to lift 1,000 pounds, they need to be able to squeeze everything to drive through the ground. So that naturally is going to create stiffness. There's going to be less fluid transfer in the joints altogether. The other hand, we have an expansive athlete. So these are the dancers. Golfers are a little bit more on that side of the spectrum, where you see these athletes have to create these really, really big ranges of motion. That requires the joints to create this expansive quality, but they're not as good as the wide rib cages or the compression athletes at producing the force. So there's a reason why, like, I'm definitely a narrow. My ability to lift a heavy amount of load, there's going to be a genetic fall for me. I will not be the world record powerlifter. I don't have the natural piece of it. I can train, but there is going to be a fall off to reach elite level athletics. So the wide versus narrow thing, it really comes down to the strategies they use, one being a really good compressor and the other being a really good expansive athlete. So that's what creates the stiffness in the first place.
Maybe what's interesting is triathlon probably includes all elements, and that's really the tough part, right?
Yeah.
So, and you have to do it in a medium with water, right? So you have to create power in this, and you have to expand, but in this environment where you have to create power with consistent amount of time. So ultimately, the triathlon really does lend itself down to, you're not only the jack of all trades in the skill context, you have to have a good range of motion or access to range of motion, in three disciplines, and then be able to do that load over a week's year's time. And that's the tough part.
And if I look at these table tests in triathlon, you have three different shapes. You have an overhead extended bias position in the water. Okay, that goes through the range of motion. But if I look at the full overhead position, that's an extension overhead position. Then you have a flex bent over position on the bike, and then you have to go back to a running extended bias position. So you have to be extremely dynamic. Really, the most important thing is, do you have the ability to do both? Go from one into the other, because the far left of the spectrum is the power lifter, and the far right would be like the super, all the dancers, the really, really flexible people that have a lot of that expansive qualities. Triathletes kind of need to have both, because you're creating power to move yourself forward as fast as possible, but you can't stiffen up so much to where when you get off the bike and you're having a hard time getting into a groove, a lot of that time is because your body's searching for a place to expand and create space, and it can't. So that causes a lot of issues for a lot of people on a mechanic standpoint, where we see breakdown and fatigue and overuse stuff flare up and stuff like that.
I love it. And I've got a question here. This is a tough question, and it's a big question from Bob on in the comment section here. Can you address developing mobility versus flexibility? And then while you're doing that, how do you determine the right balance of mobility and flexibility?
I'm going to take this one and start out with with Bob. We love your comments all the time. And once again, this is like a 5-episode question. I literally have, I teach this in my class, right? And this is like 3 weeks worth of material. So this is a big question, and it's a difficult one, because we need both. But we need mobility, we need flexibility, and we need stability. And I think Brian was doing such a good job, and Max was doing such a good job of saying how in triathlon, it's so dynamic, and where you need stability for one sport, you need mobility for another sport. And the balance is so difficult, and it's so one person, and so specific for that person and what they have available to them. I know for me personally, I have issues. We saw this with my thoracic spine, and I don't have enough mobility there. But then the question is that a good thing or a bad thing for me as a triathlete, right? Because if I go to just some off-the-shelf therapist somewhere, and they're going to measure me, and they're like, oh, okay, well, you're limited in your thoracic rotation. That's the reason you're having your issues. I'm like, okay, and I fix it. Well, maybe I lose the ability to transfer power when I'm running from my upper body to the lower body, or on the bike. I'm in the time trial position, right? And I'm having to actually, there's a connection between my front of my body and my hips and my legs. And if I lose that, that could be a problem. So figuring that stuff out, honestly, this is the crux of the situation, and working with people that truly understand the sport. And we've been talking about the body of the person in front of you, right? Because I can't tell you how many people have told me, hey, your thoracic spine is a problem. And I'm like, okay, but what would happen if I do that? What will I lose versus what will I gain? Because over time, my body's developed that so I can actually generate force from one part of my body to the other. And this is, honestly, Bob, I hate to tell you this, there's no right answer to answer what is best, how do you do one versus the other. This is big picture stuff. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, outside of just defining the differences between them, which
that's
the industry, and the industry still works towards solidifying that. Okay, we all agree that flexibility means this and mobility is this. Outside of just defining it, it's we ask the question, what is needed, how much is needed, and is that ultimately going to get me to a higher level of performance for what I care about, which is triathlon or running or swimming. And that really is the most important question, because if you're a really good cyclist, that's one of the three. You're ranking your
good cyclist. Yep.
You're a good cyclist. And what's the one that you always need to keep working on?
Swimming.
Okay, so swimming is going to be definitely a more expansive quality than it is a get in the saddle and compress and create force. So you have the shape to be really good at that. But if you want to be a very elite level swimmer, you're going to have to learn how to create some more space so you can access a little more rotation and again, lengthen that rubber band concept.
But the real question is, if we go after that, what do we lose in the context?
Right.
Rob Peter to pay Paul?
Yeah, and that's the issue, right? And that's why in triathlon, we talked about it a lot on the show, is the balance between the three sports, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even if it was purely time, if I swam 5 days a week and rode less, do I finish the race faster? Right? This is what it comes down to. If I gain more mobility in my arm, let's say, and I can swim 10 seconds per 100 faster, but I lose the connection between my upper body and my lower body on the bike or running, do I lose more? And there's no way to answer that question. There really isn't. But that's the fun of triathlon. And that's the fun, honestly, for me, of working with people like this, and working with others and having these conversations. Like the three of us, and you, John, as well, could sit down for 5 hours and talk about this stuff, which is awesome. And we're gonna come back here and we're gonna do more stuff with these guys, because these are the type of conversations we want to have. And great questions like with what we've got tonight already. Our audience obviously is into this stuff. So let's answer the question. So in the industry, your industry is a little bit different than my industry. How would you define flexibility?
So since you teach the class,
but your industry is a little bit different than mine.
Yeah, and our world too is very. We get a lot of reps in the trenches in here. So when we're looking at people, we are defining it not as a textbook. You would see, like, if you Googled what flexibility is, my interpretation of that's definitely going to be biased towards what we do every day and what we're actually seeing. So, but a flexibility is the ability to passively move a joint through a range of motion. Now, how much range of motion? That's depending on the textbook that we're trying to accomplish. It's can the joint accomplish that task without any demands on it? So for me, that means gravity. That means being able to move your body in space and have control over those motions. This is more of a passive. Can you move in space kind of thing passively is kind of how I look at it.
And passively means someone else is moving you.
Yeah.
Right? Like when he was lifting my arm, he was moving me. And that, I agree with that. That is a very good definition of flexibility. It's like, this is how much your joint can move in any given plane of motion or any given direction. And we can measure, like you were measuring it, just kind of on the fly. We can measure it in so many different ways, right? John, even in the kinematics lab, you can literally lay someone on the table and put them there, and you can get the measurements, right?
Yeah.
And then mobility.
So mobility would be the active version. So just because you might have some range of motion on the table, that does not mean that's what you're going to display when you are here. Because based on your hip flexion here, I think you should be able to squat like lower. But the strategy at which you're using your squat does not match up with your passive flexibility. So if I'm looking at mobility, it's now if I'm asking the joint to go through a range of motion, whether it's multi-jointed or just a single joint, how much range now do you have when you're telling your body, your brain to do that motion?
So for people that are thinking about how do I do this on my own, an example would be is if they pulled their knee to chest, in theory, right, on the table, and then how high could they lift their leg just standing there? There's going to be a difference between the two. So easy way to think about it, it's like a passive flexibility versus, or your active range of motion. Those are the two things that you want to think about. In the sporting world, we're using our active range, but again, we start with the passive side, and then it draws a picture of what can this person do in an active context. So Chandler saw that, his range of motion, his hips got to a certain point. He should, based on those numbers, be able to squat a certain way, or he should be able to do a certain thing in the athletic movement we're looking at. If the answer is no, then that's when we start asking more questions of why. And then that's really what we kind of strive to change over time. And then we go back and check table measurements. Did change happen, yes or no? And that's the on-fly experiment of how you go from assessment, intervention, and then hopefully positive outcome.
And another one we see all the time is we'll do a straight leg test, okay, and they'll fail, like they'll have like 30 degrees, and then so theoretically they shouldn't be able to touch their toes because it's the same. Doing this is the same motion as doing this, like theoretically, but they'll get off the table and palm the ground with their knees locked straight. We see this all the time. How on earth is that possible? So it's the strategy at which they're trying to get down to their toes is the how that I was talking about earlier. Is we want to know what you have, but how you get there is really the name of the game, because that really tells us how much real mobility do you actually own versus are you renting it by using another strategy to get down there that might be detrimental to what you're trying to accomplish long term by staying healthy.
I also think that oftentimes we measure flexibility in one joint, where mobility is multi-joint. Yeah. So what he's talking about with the touching your toes, yeah, his hips actually might stop at 30 degrees, but his back, there's vertebrae allow him to get more, right? And it's something that they've compensated for over time, because let's say they've had a coach that says it's important you can touch your toes. So every day you have to practice touching your toes. But they didn't look at the hip joint. They didn't care. There's like, you can do it, right? And so the mobility is, you can do it.
Yeah. The body is so fast. It can adapt so quickly and over time with enough reps. It's if you tell somebody to keep doing it, especially at the peak ages as they're developing, it's scary how fast.
I'll give you a triathlon metaphor for this one as well. So my swim coach, and this is not just the one I have now, they always say, Ted, your biggest problem is you don't reach far enough on your right-hand side. Okay. So what do they tell me? Reach. Okay. So, but no swim coach I've ever had has come and assessed my shoulder, right? It's just, you need to do that. So then what do I do every time they repeat that to me? Every time I swim and the coach says that, well, then I'm going to reach, right? Because I want to please my coach, right? So eventually I can actually I can get there. It used to be like 3 or 4 years ago, I'd be like here. Now I can get to here. So when I used to push up the wall, I couldn't get my hands, right? But just years of someone telling me, hey, this is your problem. Okay. So now I've gained that mobility, but my swimming time's no better.
Oh.
Right. And so my mobility is better, but my flexibility is funny because we worked together a long time ago. It was a problem 7 years ago when we worked together. Right. So this is weird. This kind of weird stuff. I've gained my mobility, not gotten any faster, but my flexibility is the same.
Yeah. Okay. So now I want to jump in and give another question from Colleen, which is related to all this, and this is great. Her question, and we're almost out of time here, but her question is this all dependent on and this is where you're speaking to, Ted, the sport we train the most, or is it dependent on the sport we're best at?
Good question.
In the context of triathlon, right?
Yes, I would say so. Yes, I think I would read this in terms of swim, bike, and run, that we all do three sports, because a triathlete may be, well, that Colleen also asked this. It's in the context of, is a triathlete expected to do different on these tests versus a swimmer, versus a cyclist, versus a runner?
The short answer is yes. I mean, in terms of what my expectations would be on the individual in front of me, if I know that he is just a cyclist and he's in the saddle for X amount of miles or hours a week, his adaptations to that, especially if he's doing it for years, is going to be different than he's like, well, I'm in this extended position a lot as well because I run and I swim. So for what he's trying to accomplish, now, if he's just trying to be the best cyclist, he doesn't need to be the best person at this. You don't have to be able to be the best at doing that to be a good cyclist. So your body, I always look at your body as just a representation of what you spend a lot of time doing, and then there is the whole genetic piece, that there are certain things you're naturally going to be a little bit better at, which we've all experienced. You try a sport and you pick it up because it fits, and especially an athletic sport that requires high level movement and all this stuff. But there's always going to be that predisposed, well, I'm going to be a naturally better swimmer because of the shape of my body. I pick it up faster than somebody who doesn't have that range. They might be a better cyclist. So it's kind of a short answer, yes. I mean,
and I'm going to add a piece to this. I actually think it goes a lot to, I think this is where Colleen's coming from, is like, if you've been a swimmer for a long time, or if you've been a cyclist for a long time, or you've been a runner for a long time, especially if that was in your developmental time, like when you were a teenager, I think teenager in particular, going through the metamorphosis of maturation, right? That will determine a lot as far as your how your body develops, how your joints develop, how your neural patterning develops. I always say the best thing you can do for your kids, if you have kids, is have them do everything.
Yeah.
As many things as possible when they're in that formative time, right? And that will allow these things to happen. Whereas you see these kids that they swim 40,000 yards a week, 50,000 yards a week, and they get these postures, right? And you can tell them they're 30, they haven't swum in 10 years, they still have that posture. And then you want to get them to run. And they've been in this kind of like flex, posture, and you want to get them extended and open. It's a difficult thing to do. There's a reason why the USAT is focused on, let's find people that are runners and swimmers, because they're actually quite opposite, right? And then we can get you to bike. It's a really interesting thing, and it's a great question that Colleen asked. I mean, honestly,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Max.
I would say it's such a good question, because we all as triathletes go through this. Like, very few of us are great at all three sports, right? And how many times have we talked about, John, being mediocre at three sports? Even being mediocre at three sports is hard, right? We all know swimmers that can't run. We know runners that can't swim. We know cyclists that can't run. And figuring those things out is super, super hard, especially if you don't have the tools, right? Because what we're getting at is we're doing kind of a check of the tools, or even a check of my engine, I guess. If I don't have the right engine, this is going to be a problem. But this is like some of the ways we can actually start to determine those things and ultimately make changes for people.
Yeah, because if you came in saying, I just want to be the best swimmer I can be, my direction with you would be a little different than you saying, no, I want to be a high-level triathlete. Because you have to be careful with what you chase, given the fact that you might get a couple adaptations along the way that might actually hinder a few things on the performance spectrum. So those are really important questions to ask.
Well, this has been amazing. I'm sorry, Max.
Oh, it was just closing out Colleen's statement. I think she came from a swim background, right? So like the adaptations that you would develop with the same individual, if you did a lifetime of swimming, lifetime of cycling, lifetime of running, and then you developed into a triathlete, or you picked the sport at that point. I think the biggest thing to come into is, when it comes to being in this environment, is the movement. Big thought here. The movements that you're going to chase are going to be derived by the adaptations you've developed for the whole lifetime of your career. But ultimately, you're not going to know if something is something worth chasing until you've run the application of strength training and you've done a lot of round assessments. There's really no right answer. The success is, did you get faster? Ted's always said that. And did you get hurt? Or did you not get hurt? And that's one of your success metrics. And so ultimately, there's never going to be, is this the right thing for me? What is the right range of motion? You don't know until you load the system with triathlon training to know, did you have the appropriate range of motion? We could probably make some assumptions that Ted has some movement issues, but has he been injury free in a certain amount of time? Has he had the success and has his expectation management met how much time he's been able to train? And has he got where he wanted to be? Those answers are yes. Then sometimes you're just kind of trying to keep the athlete within those ranges, even if they're not optimal, whatever that might be. And that's kind of the biggest takeaway point is, if I think a couple talks ago, John and Ted, you guys did the, strength training, investment exercise and things like that. There's a lot of context to, if it's not broke, don't fix it, but make sure we stay within these, these bumpers. I use that example a lot. So, but it's been a blast, John, and we're hanging out with you guys.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you mentioned it, because that's one of the comments. Chip mentioned that as specific. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I really like the words that you gave earlier, Max, where you talked about whether or not you should change something. And then this is where it is just so fantastic to have this because this assessment, because we have such great expertise here in Las Vegas, and to be able to tap into, I posted a link to Elevate in the comment section here. This has just been really fantastic, and thank you both for taking the time to, one, set this up, do the assessment. That was fantastic, and then just really share your expertise. You're giving some secret sauce away here.
Oh, there are no secrets.
Yeah.
There's just different ways to look at them. We've been looking at the body for a really long time, and I think we're getting smarter at asking good questions. But ultimately, what helps people learn and is you reach people, you understand them, and you have some good ways to test some things. But ultimately, you have to run the experiment. People have to trust you that you're in charge of that experiment, and that's with a good tri coach, a strength coach, a musculoskeletal doc, chiro PT, athletic trainer, what have you. And that's really how you get good outcomes, ultimately, you know.
And I don't think they gave away the secret sauce because they just scratched the surface. Assessment,
Yeah.
like they did the passive assessment, right? There's still the mobility and the dynamic assessment.
Yep.
And we'll be back at Elevate at another point, and we'll run me through that.
Well, and that's a great point, Ted, because really what we've done is not only scratch the surface, but shown how complicated this is, and it really takes people who are focused on understanding this to really try to help us along. So this, my goodness, this has been great. You've been a big part of the community, or you are a big part of the community. So thank you again for taking the time doing this.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks, John, and thanks all the listeners. And we'll see you next Friday.
All right. Sounds good. Good night.
Okay. Good night.